In the unforgiving heart of the Sahel, the wind does not simply blow at cuts. It carries the sting of sand that blinds the eyes, cracks the lips, and buries entire villages in silence. For decades, this land in Burkina Faso has known only two colors, the pale yellow of dying grass and the red of scorched earth. Wells have gone dry, trees have withered into skeletal shadows, and families' whole generations have left their homes not out of choice, but because the land could no longer feed them. Then came a piece of news so strange, so unexpected, that it raced from dusty village squares all the way to the air-conditioned offices of New York, London, and Paris. Burkina Faso will release 1.2 million rabbits into the desert. Not onto farms, not in cages, but directly into the sea of sand itself. Around the world, experts shook their heads. A stunt, a gamble, an impossible dream, they whispered. But in the capital, Ouagadougou, President Ibrahim Traoré stood before the cameras, his voice steady and unshaken. We do not wait for miracles. We create them. To him, these 1.2 million creatures are not symbols of chance. They are an army, a living force of tiny ecosystem engineers, each one armed not with weapons, but with claws and determination. They will dig, they will burrow, they will turn lifeless soil into fertile ground. It is a plan born not from wealth, but from wisdom, marrying the lessons of nature with the resilience of a people who refuse to surrender. 5 years from now, if the vision succeeds, where there is now only wind and dust, there will be rice fields, maize beans, and the sound of children laughing under a green canopy. So I ask you, can something so small rewrite the destiny of an entire nation? If you believe the world should know about this fight for survival, share this story. And if you stand with the people of Burkina Faso, let your voice join theirs, because sometimes the smallest footsteps can leave the biggest mark on history. The reality on the ground in Burkina Faso is as unforgiving as the midday sun over the Sahel. For years, the people here have been caught in what locals call the season of death months, when the wind scours the land with hot, sand-laden gusts, and the sky withholds every drop of rain. It is during this time that the land cracks open like an old wound, wells sink into silence, and livestock, once the wealth of families collapse where they stand reduced to skin, bone, and dust. This is not a hardship that comes once in a generation. It is an annual siege. Each year, the desert advances by thousands of hectares, swallowing fields that once grew millet, maize, and beans. Each year, more villages are reduced to ghostly outlines in the sand. Each year, tens of thousands of people are forced to leave their homes, searching for work in distant cities, often never to return. And with every departure, the fabric of community unravels. President Ibrahim Traoré has walked these villages. He has seen the hollow stares of farmers who have stopped planting because the land no longer yields. He has listened to the weary sighs of mothers counting each drop of water before giving it to a child. And he knows that if nothing is done, vast portions of his nation will simply vanish from the map of human habitation. Conventional solutions, massive machinery, deep plowing, chemical fertilizers are simply out of reach. The cost of importing hundreds of heavy tractors and earth-moving machines would run into hundreds of millions of dollars, not counting fuel maintenance and spare parts. Even if the government could afford it, such machinery cannot work in the extreme conditions of the Sahel without frequent breakdowns. That is why the announcement to release 1.2 million rabbits into the desert came as such a shock. To outsiders, it sounded whimsical, like trying to fight a wildfire with a bucket of rain. But the decision was rooted in both science and local experience. Rabbits are what ecologists call ecosystem engineers. Their natural behavior, digging tunnels, breaks apart compacted soil, allowing air to circulate and water to seep deep underground. Studies in arid regions have shown that areas near animal burrows can have water infiltration rates over 20% higher than untouched ground. Their droppings, rich in nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, act as organic fertilizer delivered directly into the earth, restoring fertility without chemicals. The vision is vast: to restore 100,000 hectares of desert, 80% of which will become arable land within 5 years. This will not be a wild release. The plan calls for carefully managed zones, protection from predators, and phased relocation of rabbits once an area is rehabilitated, ensuring they do not damage crops. The rabbits will be accompanied by a human workforce, local men and women hired to care for them, maintain protective barriers, plant erosion control trees, and manage water resources. This is where the project becomes more than an environmental initiative. It is a social transformation. Every hectare brought back to life means food for families, jobs for youth, and a reason for people to stay in their villages rather than migrate to overcrowded cities. Every refilled well means a village can thrive again, and every green sprout emerging from once dead earth becomes a visible declaration we have not lost to the desert. In the eyes of President Traore, this is not a gamble, it is a campaign. The battlefield is the desert, the enemy is drought, and the soldiers are a living army of small, tireless creatures working day and night. If successful, it will not only rewrite the future of Burkina Faso, but also provide a model for the entire Sahel, where millions of hectares are under siege from advancing sands. When the day of the announcement arrived, the hall in Ouagadougou was filled with the restless energy of an event that nobody quite understood. Journalists from across Africa, Europe, and America sat shoulder to shoulder waiting for what they thought would be just another speech about climate change or agricultural reform. Cameras hummed quietly, pens hovered over notepads. Then President Ibrahim Traoré stepped up to the podium. He did not speak with the nervous energy of a man proposing something uncertain. His voice was measured, almost defiant. And then, in a single sentence, he detonated the news: we will release 2 million rabbits into the desert to bring life back to the land. There was a moment of stunned silence. Then the room erupted, not in applause, but in the kind of murmurs that ripple when people can't decide whether they've just heard brilliance or madness. Within hours, headlines shot around the globe. Burkina Faso's bizarre desert plan. Traoré's gamble. 1.2 million rabbits. Western commentators took turns poking holes in the idea. Uncontrolled breeding will devastate crops, some warned. Others dismissed it as a distraction from political challenges. Late-night talk show hosts in Europe turned it into a punchline, joking about the African rabbit army. But in villages across Burkina Faso, the reaction was different. Farmers gathered under neem trees to talk it over. Some laughed at first, not out of mockery, but from the sheer novelty of it. Others leaned forward, eyes bright with the kind of cautious hope they hadn't felt in years. Old men recalled stories from their youth about how small animals and birds could transform farmland. Women who had seen the Zai pit method save fields from ruin nodded quietly, as if recognizing an idea that made sense to their bones. Traoré's environmental team moved quickly to answer the critics. They presented detailed plans. The rabbits would be introduced in stages, their population managed through natural predators and designated breeding cycles. Protective zones would be fenced and guarded. Once the soil recovered, rabbits would be relocated to new areas or their numbers reduced. This was not, they stressed, a release and forget scheme. It was a living, adaptive campaign. Internationally, a few voices broke through the noise of ridicule. Ecologists in Australia, the United States, and South Africa recognized the logic. They spoke publicly about how burrowing animals had restored degraded landscapes in their own countries. Some even offered to share data and collaborate on monitoring the project. Conservation networks began circulating the story not as a joke, but as an experiment worth watching. Still, the strongest momentum came from inside Burkina Faso. Youth groups volunteered to help build protective shelters and plant erosion control trees. Farmers signed up to work as caretakers, guards, and water managers for the rabbit zones. In the north, where entire villages had been on the verge of abandonment, families began talking about staying. The turning point in public perception came not from speeches or studies, but from the first footage broadcast on national TV of rabbits being released into the sand. Viewers watched as the small creatures, undaunted by the heat, began to dig. Within hours, tiny mounds of fresh soil appeared around the burrows. The commentary was simple but powerful. Life is entering the desert. That image spread faster than any headline. On social media, people in West Africa began using the phrase, "small paws, big fight." School children drew pictures of rabbits alongside green fields and hung them in classrooms. Religious leaders spoke in Friday sermons about the moral duty to protect creation, citing the project as an act of faith in both God and nature. For Traoré, this was the moment he had been aiming for, not global applause, but national unity around a shared vision. His message was clear: Burkina Faso would no longer wait for rescue from distant capitals. It would fight for its land, with its own hands, its own minds, and yes, its own rabbits. And so what began as a sentence that drew laughter in foreign newsrooms became the rallying cry for a people determined to reverse the advance of the desert. The skepticism was still there, but it was drowned out by something louder, the sound of a nation choosing to believe. The release of the first wave of rabbits was more than an ecological action. It triggered a cascade of social and political consequences across Burkina Faso. In the rural north, where the desert's advance had forced families to abandon their land, the project began to alter migration patterns almost immediately. Young men who had been preparing to leave for work in overcrowded cities decided to stay drawn by the promise of paid jobs, caring for the rabbit colonies, managing water reservoirs, or planting erosion control trees. For communities that had seen only loss for decades, this was the first sign that the land itself might become an employer again. Women, often the ones walking miles each day to fetch water, were given positions in seed planting, sapling care, and local management committees. Their inclusion wasn't symbolic, it was strategic. Studies from earlier restoration efforts had shown that women's involvement in land projects significantly improved community compliance and long-term maintenance. This decision also strengthened political support for the initiative among rural families, where the visible benefits to women and children were impossible to ignore. In the cities, the project became a topic of debate in coffee stalls, markets, and parliament chambers alike. Opposition politicians initially mocked it, calling it Traoré's rabbit circus. But as early footage of improved soil conditions and community job programs began to circulate, their tone shifted. While some still questioned the scale and cost, outright dismissal became politically risky. Rural constituencies long ignored were suddenly at the heart of a nationally celebrated campaign, and any politician seen as undermining it risked losing their trust. Internationally, the political ripples were complex. Western governments, while officially neutral, were uneasy. A successful large-scale restoration without heavy machinery, foreign contractors, or massive foreign loans would set a precedent, one that could inspire other African nations to reject aid-dependent models. Traoré's insistence on using local labor and indigenous knowledge was seen as a subtle challenge to the dominance of international development agencies. Within the African Union, however, the reaction was markedly different. Delegates from Niger, Mali, and Chad nations, facing the same creeping desert, requested technical briefings from Burkina Faso's environmental ministry. There was quiet talk of forming a Sahel Greenbelt initiative using similar methods scaled to regional needs. Traoré's political capital on the continental stage began to grow not through military alliances or trade deals, but through a practical demonstration of environmental sovereignty. Domestically, the project also began reshaping the relationship between citizens and the state. For years, government development projects had been associated with distant offices, foreign experts, and slow bureaucratic rollouts. The Rabbit Initiative was different. It was visible, tangible. People could walk to the edge of their village and see progress not in glossy reports, but in freshly turned soil and green shoots pushing through. That visibility created a new form of accountability. Local committees reported directly to regional coordinators who were empowered to make adjustments without waiting for approval from the capital. For many rural citizens, this was the first time they felt they had direct influence over a national program. Politically, Traoré framed the project not just as an environmental necessity, but as an act of independence. "We are proving," he said in one radio address, "that we can solve our own problems with our own hands." That message resonated far beyond environmentalists. It touched farmers, teachers, traders, and soldiers alike. It also served as a quiet rebuke to decades of policies that had left Burkina Faso reliant on outside assistance. By the end of the project's first year, it was no longer possible to separate the ecological impact from the political one. Restoring the land was restoring confidence in the soil, in the government, and in the idea that Burkina Faso's destiny could be written in its own handwriting. From Washington to Brussels, the Rabbit Plan became a quiet but persistent point of discussion in diplomatic and development circles. In the United States, environmental think tanks and universities were divided. Some scholars at institutions like UC Davis and Colorado State, familiar with prairie dog restoration, praised the logic behind using burrowing animals to revive arid landscapes. They pointed out that similar techniques had once helped the Great Plains recover from localized degradation, but others in policy circles viewed it with skepticism. In private briefings, analysts at USAID questioned whether the project could maintain control over rabbit populations without causing ecological imbalance. There were also concerns unspoken in public that a fully self-funded, locally managed project in the Sahel might undermine decades of development models centered on foreign contractors, imported technology, and donor-driven oversight. In Europe, reactions mirrored the split. Environmental NGOs were cautiously optimistic, seeing it as a rare example of combining indigenous knowledge with applied ecology at a national scale. Meanwhile, certain agricultural lobby groups quietly dismissed it, arguing that without large-scale mechanization, Africa's land restoration efforts would remain symbolic rather than transformative. China and Russia, by contrast, expressed interest through state media, framing the project as proof of Africa's capacity to innovate outside Western frameworks. In Moscow, ecological institutes offered technical exchange programs. In Beijing, development agencies suggested pilot projects using similar methods in semi-arid regions of Inner Mongolia. These offers weren't purely altruistic. They carried the potential for deepened political alliances. Among African nations, the ripple effect was strongest. Leaders from Niger, Mali, and Chad began discussing regional cooperation to combat desertification without heavy dependence on Western aid. The African Union's Environmental Commission scheduled a special session to examine the feasibility of replicating the approach. For American audiences, especially those over 60 who remember the Dust Bowl era through family stories, the imagery was hauntingly familiar: fields turned to dust, families uprooted, livelihoods erased. The difference is that in Burkina Faso, the fight back is coming not from tractors and federal relief programs, but from the smallest of creatures and the people who protect them. Traore's framing of the initiative as an act of sovereignty resonated with some American observers who value self-reliance. "We do not wait for miracles, we create them," he said, and it echoed like something that could have been spoken in the heartland during the 1930s. It is a narrative that challenges the dominant view of Africa as a perpetual aid recipient and reframes it as a laboratory of resilience and innovation. For the wider world, the stakes go beyond Burkina Faso's borders. If the project succeeds, it will offer a blueprint for cost-effective, scalable restoration across the Sahel and other arid regions globally. If it fails, critics will use it as proof that unconventional, locally led solutions cannot match the scale of environmental crises. Either way, the global audience is now watching not out of charity, but out of curiosity, and perhaps even the faint hope that in a world overwhelmed by environmental despair, a small army of rabbits in the Sahel might just remind us all that rebirth is still possible. 5 years from now, the world will know whether Burkina Faso's boldest environmental gamble was a passing headline or the start of a continental transformation. The stakes are far higher than 1.2 million rabbits. What is truly at risk is the survival of communities, the endurance of cultures, and the ability of a nation to define its future without asking for permission. For Burkina Faso, failure would mean more than wasted effort. It would mean conceding ground to the desert, watching more villages disappear, and surrendering yet another generation to forced migration. Success, however, could alter the trajectory of the entire Sahel. It could prove that environmental restoration does not have to be a privilege of wealthy nations, and that innovation can spring from the harshest soil on Earth. But there are dangers ahead. Climate patterns are shifting unpredictably, bringing both longer droughts and sudden destructive floods. Political stability will be tested both from internal opposition and from foreign interests, uncomfortable with a self-sufficient Africa. Even nature itself could challenge the planned predator's disease, and the delicate balance of the ecosystem must all be managed with care. And yet the very act of beginning has already changed something fundamental. Across Burkina Faso, people speak of the project as our fight, not the government's fight. They tell their children that one day they will run through green fields where their parents once walked over bare sand. That shift in ownership from passive recipients of aid to active stewards of the land may be the most important outcome of all. For those watching from abroad, especially in America, this is more than an African story. It is a reminder that solutions to global crises can come from unexpected places. It challenges us to see Africa not as a patient in need of rescue, but as a partner in rewriting the rules of survival. It asks whether we are willing to listen, learn, and even adapt such approaches to our own challenges. So here is the choice before us. We can watch from a distance, waiting to see if the desert wins, or we can stand alongside those fighting it. We can carry this story beyond the borders of Burkina Faso into conversations, classrooms, and policy debates. We can remind the world that rebirth is possible even in a place where the wind once carried only dust. If you believe in the right of every nation to shape its own destiny, if you believe that the smallest creatures can spark the largest changes, if you believe that hope, when acted upon, can outlast despair, then share this story. Write in the comments, "I stand with Burkina Faso." Because one day when the Sahel is green again, you will know you were part of the reason why.